on to President Kennedy, and after hearing the information, the President asked O'Donnell his opinion on the relationship between the two, and O'Donnell responds by saying, quote, "My gut's telling me that Khrushchev is turning to an old friend to carry his message." My gut's telling me that Khrushchev is turning to an old friend to carry his message. So, what do they do next? Sit down and decide whether they're going to accept the offer, okay? Well, Kennedy agrees. There's only one little thing Kennedy wants out of that deal. He's willing to give the Russians their missiles back, okay? But who do they want to supervise that, okay? Who do they want to inspect and make sure that the missiles all get back? The United Nations, okay? So Kennedy agrees, and he informs Scally that he would be favorable to Khrushchev's request. However, the only thing, he wanted the missiles in Cuba removed under UN inspection to make sure it was done right. He wanted the United Nations to remove them. So Kennedy agrees. He informs Scally that he would be favorable to Khrushchev's request. However, the missiles in Cuba had to be removed under UN inspection. So Scally relays this information to Foman, who in turn got the message back to Khrushchev.
So what about when people find out later that they were doing all this behind the
Oh,
scenes?
we ain't even started yet. This is the, yeah, this is the. So when Khrushchev receives the news from Foman about the president's answer to that proposal, he sends a letter to President Kennedy over the teletype, and it stated two things. So Kennedy gets a letter from Khrushchev over the teletype
On the same day?
stating two things. Yep, same day.
This is kind of a text message.
Kind of a, yeah, it comes over, a teletype is like the old AP, and they do it, it's kind of like a text message, but it takes a little longer, and
Like that.
yeah. Even more crude than facts. But anyway, here are the two things that Khrushchev states in his letter to Kennedy. First of all, he states his own fear of nuclear war. He states his own fear of nuclear war. In other words, he's saying the same thing Kennedy is. If we go to war, you know how this is going to end up. So he states his own fear of nuclear war. And he officially, somebody, who asked me if it was in writing? Somebody said, was this in writing?
I think Julie did.
Was it in one day?
No, somebody said when I talked about
Said-
this, was it in the contract?
Oh,
Yeah, well, here wasn't a contract, but in the letter was Khrushchev's offer of removing the missiles and missile launching pads in Cuba if the United States would lift the quarantine zone and pledge they would not invade Cuba. So do you see where Khrushchev added a little bit, Kennedy added under UN inspection? He added, not only will we don't want you to invade Cuba, but you got to get that quarantine zone lifted too, okay? So, again, Premier Khrushchev receives the news from Foman. He then sends a letter through teletype to President Kennedy stating, number one, Khrushchev's own fear of nuclear war, and number two, he would present an offer of removing the missiles and missile launching pads in Cuba if the United States would lift the quarantine zone and give him a pledge they would never invade Cuba. So both guys kind of added something, you see what I mean? But was it unreasonable? Either one, no. So at this point, kiddos, at this point, it looks like the Cuban Missile Crisis. On Friday, October 26th, it looks like this thing is heading towards an end. Unfortunately, 12 hours later, Kennedy would get another teletype from Khrushchev that would be much different than this one. And what's he going to be asking for? Missiles in Turkey. We'll get to that in a minute. Very good. So, at the end of the day of Friday, October 26th, it looked like this crisis was going to be heading towards an end. But 12 hours later, a correspondence from Khrushchev is going to look a lot different and throw a big monkey wrench into all of this. Which takes us to Saturday, October 27th.
Oh my goodness. understandable that he's asking about the missiles in Turkey because we're making them remove the ones in Cuba, so
Yeah.
why wouldn't it be
Yeah.
a big deal?
Well, it's just another weird happening in history that screws this up. You'll be amazed. Well, the morning of October 27th, 1962, Kennedy receives another teletype from Premier Khrushchev that's much different than the first one he had received the day before. Okay? So on the morning of October 27th, 1962, President Kennedy receives a teletype from Premier Khrushchev that's much different than the first one he received the day before. And you guessed it, this new teletype stated that the Soviet Union would only remove the missiles and construction sites in Cuba if the United States agreed to do what? Remove our missiles in Turkey. How would a guy change his mind that quick? Well, President Kennedy's advisors were just as horrified as you are of how Khrushchev could change his mind in just 12 hours. And what do they think happened, Brian? Or, very good, or what might the military have done? No. If you're overthrown Khrushchev, a military coup. So now we're really screwed because we don't know who's even running the country over in Russia. Is it Khrushchev or is it the military? This is all going through your mind. So you're President Kennedy, you're Kenneth O'Donnell, you're his advisors, you're ex-com. You're wondering how in the world does this guy change his mind from this to this in 12 hours? There's something going on. Either the military has stepped in, or worse, the military has overthrown Khrushchev and now they're running the Soviet Union. Which would be good or bad?
Bad.
Really bad. Yeah, really bad. Okay? So if the military is giving this ultimatum, it presents an entirely new scenario if Khrushchev's no longer in power because the deal was made between those two secretly. Make sense?
Kennedy's cabinet wasn't mad at him?
Well, he only had his closest advisors in on this. The military didn't get a shot at this thing, okay? Now, as he's getting this bad news, he receives more information that might force him to order these airstrikes and invade Cuba anyway. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of why he may, in the end, have to invade anyway and do airstrikes. First of all, he finds out through further what? Spy plane flights that the Soviets have implemented a crash program to get the missiles operational. In other words, instead of working 8 hours a day maybe to get them operational, they're working 24 hours a day. They're working faster and faster to get the missiles operational. That's a huge problem for us, okay? So he finds out that the Soviets have implemented a crash program in Cuba to get the missiles operational. He also receives information from these spy plane photos that some of the missiles were already operational, and within just 36 hours, the rest will become operational. That's really bad news, right? Not only have they implemented a crash program to get all the missiles operational, that now with these new recent spy plane photos, that there are some already operational, and all of them are going to be operational in 36 hours. And the third bit of information he received from the spy photos is that the Soviets had deployed battlefield nuclear weapons to Cuba, known as frogs. Battlefield nuclear weapons. What are they going to use these on? No, these are battlefield nuclear weapons. In other words, you don't launch them. And when we invade, they're going to use them on us. So this is what he gets that morning. A new letter wanting to trade only for the missiles in Turkey. He gets information from spy flights that they have put a crash program into place to get all these missiles operational. They find out also that some of the missiles are already operational, and in 36 hours they're all going to be operational. And now they've deployed battlefield nuclear weapons in Cuba to use against our forces when they invade. Now, what do you think General LeMay said to President Kennedy when he gave him all this information? He said, the longer we wait, the harder it's going to get. What's he mean by that? The longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. Remember he said I can guarantee you 90%? Well, the longer you wait here, I'm not going to be able to guarantee anything. LeMay. So General LeMay says the president, he's pushing for what? Airstrikes and invasion, stating the longer we wait, the harder it's going to get. So, Kennedy approves the following. This is very important. Kennedy approves the following after LeMay's comment. Number one, Kennedy approves the following. Number one, he issues pre-invasion orders to American military forces. Think about that. What's that mean? He issues pre-invasion orders. When I call, we go. So you are on the ground ready to go. Pre-invasion orders means we're going as soon as I say go. That's all it takes. Okay? Before they invade, what are they going to do according to the protocol? Airstrike. Second thing he does is he orders General Maxwell Taylor to execute airstrikes the morning of Monday, October 29th. What day are we on? Saturday. So he orders Maxwell Taylor to execute airstrikes on Cuba the morning of October 29th. We're going to war Monday, October 29th. That's what he's saying. And the third thing he did is he approves further U-2 flight missions. Why? We know that now. But what do we need for Monday? Targets. So he's going to give he orders another U-2 flight to pick targets that will be hit by the airstrikes on Monday. So he issues pre-invasion orders to American military forces. He orders General Maxwell Taylor to prepare the military to execute the airstrikes the morning of Monday, October 29th. And he approves further U-2 flight missions to finalize the pilots' target folders for the airstrikes on Monday. What are they going to hit? Okay? Yeah. Now, that brings Kenneth back into the picture.
If they hit a nuclear weapon with another one of theirs,
This destroys it.
Oh.
It doesn't yet start out engaged yet. Good question. So what's Kenneth O'Donnell got to do on, especially after the third thing he did? Let's see, Kenneth O'Donnell got to do now. Come on! What's the third thing he authorized? So what's he got to do? Kenneth O'Donnell's got to get on the phone to talk to the pilot. The pilot was Major Rudolph Anderson. So as a result of the new U-2 flight, Kenneth O'Donnell again gets on the telephone to talk to a pilot, and this time he talks with Major Rudolph Anderson. Now, this is not going to be a low-level flight on the deck, because what are they picking? Targets, and you can do that from a higher distance. So he's going to be less at risk. But if he's fired upon, what are the military going to want to do? They're going to want to not wait till Monday, right? They're going to want to go. And O'Donnell's trying to give the president some time to do what? Come up with a better solution to this, okay? Now, here's the conversation. Just listen. O'Donnell says this. Major, my name is Kenneth O'Donnell, Special Assistant to the President. Major, a few days ago, the President ordered me to help him keep control of what is going on out there. I have been browbeating pilots and Navy guys left and right to make sure you don't get us here in Washington into trouble. But you know what? We're pretty damn good ourselves at getting into trouble, so instead of riding your ass, I'm just going to tell you what's going on here and let you figure out how to best help us up here. A lot of things are going wrong today, and it's making everyone nervous. The more things that go wrong, people become more nervous, and it will be very hard to avoid war. Anderson's on the other end of the phone. He's not really sure what O'Donnell's getting at, right? So he says, what exactly do you want, Mr. O'Donnell? And he says, don't get shot down. And after some further conversations with Major Anderson, where he says, you know, a million things can go wrong, etc., finally O'Donnell says to the pilot, "Are you a religious man?" And Anderson stated that he was, and O'Donnell said, "Good." Soon afterwards, news was received that Major Anderson's plane was shot down over Cuba, killing the pilot. As a result, Major Rudolph Anderson becomes the first and only combat fatality of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He is shot down and killed. All right, I'm just going to read this to you. Put your pens down, just listen, because this is the story of Rudolph Anderson. I'll get you a copy of this if you want. On October 27, 1962, Rudolph Anderson Jr. streaked through the stratosphere 14 miles above a planet tied up in knots. Anderson was not originally scheduled to fly on this day, but he lobbied hard for the assignment when the mission was added to the schedule. The mission would be the most dangerous yet, with Soviet SA-2 surface-to-air missile, or SAMs, now operational, and war seemed imminent. Shortly after Anderson entered Cuban airspace, his unarmed, high-altitude U-2 spy plane appeared as a blip on Soviet radar. As the Soviet military tracked the intruding aircraft, their concern mounted that the pilot was photographing secret locations of tactical nuclear weapons in Cuba. Soviet Lieutenant General Stefan Greco was quoted as saying, "Our guest had been up there for over an hour. I think we should give the order to shoot it down, as it is discovering our positions in depth." The only man authorized to order a surface-to-air missile launch, or SAM launch, was the Soviet commanding general. At this point in the crisis, this man was nowhere to be found. As a result, Stefan Greco gave the order himself, quote, "Destroy target number 33. 2 surface-to-air missiles rocketed into the sky towards Major Anderson's plane. One exploded near the U-2, shrapnel piercing the cockpit along with Anderson's pressurized flight suit and helmet, likely killing him instantly. The U-2 plunged 72,000 feet to the surface of Cuba. Within hours, word of Anderson's death reached the White House cabinet room. Military leaders overwhelmingly urged Kennedy to launch airstrikes against Cuba's air defenses the following morning, the SAM sites that fired upon him, okay? When the president learned that the 35-year-old Anderson had a wife and 2 sons, ages 3 and 5, it struck home as his son, John Jr., was about the same age as Major Anderson's youngest son. In a letter that President Kennedy later wrote to Major Anderson's widow, 2 months pregnant with a baby girl, he stated, "Your husband's mission was of the greatest importance, but I know how deeply you must feel his loss." Major Rudolph Anderson became the first ever recipient of the Air Force Cross, the highest designation short of the Medal of Honor. Memories of Rudolph Anderson may have faded, but he is not forgotten in his hometown of Greenville, South Carolina, where he built model airplanes as a young boy and chose good humor as the clear blue sky of his soul. As his high school yearbook quote. On the 50th anniversary of his death, the city of Greenville, in conjunction with Furman University and the Uptown History Museum, will unveil the redesigned Major Rudolph Anderson Jr. Memorial, which was originally installed in 1963. 13 engraved granite slabs embedded in the lawn describe each day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and surrounding an F-86 Sabre jet, similar to one flown by Anderson, are text panels describing his boyhood, his distinguished military career, and his lasting legacy of contributing to the peaceful solution of the crisis. Historians sum up the death of Major Rudolph Anderson as follows. Anderson's death escalated the crisis significantly. It could have provoked a cascading series of events leading to a nuclear World War III. Instead, his death was a jolt to Kennedy and Khrushchev and pushed the crisis to a point of where they had to take a clear path, one of negotiation. So we'll see where we go from here. The last point I want to make today is, what is the military insisting? Airstrikes, not on Cuba so much, but on the SAM sites that fired at Anderson. However, that's gonna lead to where we don't wanna go. Tomorrow, we'll tell you what Kennedy does under the pressure of retaliation by the American military. What a great story, Miss.
Yeah, excited. How's it gonna end? I think they worked it out, but.
I don't know, I think
It's different every time.
We're here, so something got worked out, right?
I don't see